A revolutionary secret is hiding in one of the most boring places in the Bible. And it's not just well hidden, it's one of the most radical and subversive ideas in the whole Hebrew scriptures. And it directly challenges the power of the kings and the nobility of the times, reshaping how we think about humanity itself. In this boring place I'm talking about, the genealogies in Genesis chapters 4 and 5. But before you roll your eyes and click away, give me a chance to explain why these genealogies are so radical and why they are one of the most important social breakthroughs in history. The deeper I looked, the more I realized that these genealogies challenge the very foundations of how power worked in the ancient world. My name is Francisco and welcome to Carving the Bible. On this channel, I carve the Bible in an effort to preserve it for the distant future. If you'd like to find out more about this project, see the description below. To understand how revolutionary Genesis is, you first have to understand how genealogies were used in the ancient Near East. They weren't just about tracing family trees. They were political weapons used to justify the rule of kings by linking them to divine favor. The Sumerian kings list, for example, claims that before the flood, the kings were directly appointed by the gods. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the famous king of Uruk is described as 2/3 god and 1/3 human. And meanwhile, in Egypt, the pharaohs weren't just kings, they were living gods, the literal sons of Re, the children of the sun god himself. From Mesopotamia to Egypt to Persia, kings claimed divine lineage to justify their absolute power. So what does all this have to do with the genealogies in Genesis? The book of Genesis preserves ancient traditions, many passed down from the Bronze Age. But by the time it reaches its final form, it does something that no other culture does. Instead of using genealogies to justify a royal family, Genesis traces all of humanity, not just kings, back to a common ancestor, Adam, made in God's image. In Mesopotamia and Egyptian traditions, genealogies proved a ruler's divine favor. But Genesis flips that idea upside down. Instead of saying that only kings reflect the gods, Genesis declares that all people are made in the image of God. We are all children of God. We are all created in His image. We all have inherent value, not because of royal blood, but because of something deeper. And that idea, it changed the world. We take this concept for granted today. But before Genesis, the idea that every person had sacred value was not self-evident. Think about the famous words in the U.S. Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These are not self-evident at all without Genesis as part of our cultural foundation. This idea was born in Genesis, in a time when kings claimed the gods for themselves and commoners were seen as just expendable laborers. A Mesopotamian myth called the Atrahasis epic describes how humans were created to be nothing more than workers for the gods. It explicitly says so in one of its verses. Genesis rejects this idea outright, telling a story where humans are enslaved to the gods. They're made in the image of God. But it doesn't end there. Genesis doesn't just democratize divine ancestry. It divides it into two parts. Cain's descendants is a genealogy of corruption, which ultimately descends into violence and arrogance. Seth's descendants in Genesis chapter 5 is a genealogy of righteousness, leading to Noah and Abraham. The distinction between the two isn't bloodlines or noble birth, it's about moral choices. Unlike other ancient myths, where fate is determined by divine ancestry, Genesis suggests that righteousness, not birth, determines God's favor. And here's something even more surprising. Genesis doesn't just trace the righteous line, it also preserves Cain's line, those who sin and descend into chaos. This means that even the corrupt, the fallen, and the violent still share in Adam's divine ancestry. In this video, I'm carving Genesis chapter 4, verse 15 to Genesis chapter 5, verse 2. And the Lord said to him, Therefore, whoever slays Cain, it shall be revenged sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest any finding him should smite him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, towards the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mehujael, and Mehujael begot Methusahel, and Methusahel begot Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second Zillah. And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and breed cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of those who handle the harp and pipe. And Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, the forger of every kind of tool of brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have slain a man for my wound, and a youth for my bruise. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, Lamech 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For God has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, because Cain has slain him. And to Seth, to him also was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. Then people began to call on the name of the Lord. This is the book of Adam's generations. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God he made him. Male and female he created them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. Both Cain's and Seth's lines come from Adam, made in God's image. Genesis removes the divine right of kings and replaces it with the moral responsibility of every human being. This is a radical departure from the ancient world. While other ancient traditions link divine favor to kingship, Genesis radically reshapes this idea into something entirely new. All humans, not just kings, are connected to the divine. Moral choices, not noble birth, determine righteousness. Hierarchy is replaced with human dignity. In a world where kings claim the gods for themselves, the genealogies of Genesis tell a different story. A story where no man is above another by birthright. A story where every person, rich or poor, ruler or servant, is made in the image of the divine. And that changed everything.